Well, it's been another big day in U.S. politics with President Donald Trump announcing 100% tariffs on films produced outside of the U.S., describing the current filming situation as a national security threat. Meanwhile, President Trump took the time to also phone our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese on his election victory on Saturday, labeling him as a friend. Let's get more on this with Jared Monshine, Director of Research at the U.S. Studies Center. Jared, welcome back to the program. Now, Donald Trump says clearly Albanese is a friend of his and had no idea who the other guy was, Peter Dutton, in this case. Firstly, does this bode well for U.S.-Australian relations, at least in the short term?
Yeah, I think it does bode well in the short term, but ultimately I think the alliance is about a lot more than whoever is prime minister and whoever is president. Let's not forget that when Joe Biden was president, Anthony Albanese got a state dinner in D.C., a unique honor. But just a couple years before that, Scott Morrison also got a state dinner from Donald Trump in his first term, and one of only 4 that Donald Trump gave in his first term. So I think the alliance, in my view, has never been more important to the United States in particular, not just Australia, but to the United States. And as a result of that, Australia has never been more important or more influential in D.C. itself.
And his comments about not knowing much about the opposition leader, that's despite echoes to some degree of Trump-style political messaging being used by the coalition. What does the U.S. president's comments then tell us about how he views his allies overseas?
Well, I think if there's anything we know about Donald Trump is that he likes winners. And I think that as much as Peter Dutton may have used some of the rhetoric from the Trump administration, from President Trump, ultimately, President Trump himself is happy to deal with an electoral winner more than anything else. The Dutton approach to Donald Trump obviously was perhaps not as popular here, but with that all said, ultimately, Donald Trump is a transactional figure, and he wants to get business done with people who are in office and who are electoral winners, and that's who Anthony Albanese is right now.
Yes, and do you think we might see negotiations between Prime Minister Albanese and the president take place sooner rather than later on those 10% tariffs, although these are the least of the tariffs imposed on all of America's trading partners?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, ultimately, I think, in my view, that the 10% tariffs on Australia are really not the most economically impactful for Australia. If anything, I would focus instead on the global trading architecture and the fact that what we saw in the first term of the Trump administration was Australia partner with Japan on what we call the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, a trading bloc that the U.S. had started but then left in the early days of the first Trump administration. That trading bloc, in my view, would be a bit of a ballast and a bit of in an attempt to provide some stability to the regional trading system. I think Australia should, in my view, prioritize more of efforts like that than simply a bilateral trade deal, which in my view may not be all that impactful economically, but also may not even last that long, depending on where Donald Trump decides to go with tariffs.
And I found it quite interesting that Donald Trump told NBC News that seeking a third term in office is not something that he wants to do anymore, that he wants to achieve his goals in the 4 years that he has got. So does this completely put to bed any future moves to find loopholes in the U.S. Constitution?
I don't know if that has put anything to bed with Donald Trump. That's what he said to NBC News this week, but he very well could want to change his tune moving forward. I think ultimately, in my view, if you look at the Constitution, it's a slam dunk case that there's no way that he can get a third term. Now, the question, though, is whether he can be influential in a successor to him, whether that be particularly a Republican successor who does not denounce Donald Trump, but may embrace Donald Trump in an effort to win over his very passionate supporter. So I think he is very unlikely to serve a third term in any way, but I think he is very likely to still be an impactful player in some way or another once he's out of office.
Yes, age does catch up at some point. And now there are a few other things on the radar, not least the president's 100% tariffs on movies made outside of the U.S. Is this supposed to be good news or bad news for Hollywood?
I think on the whole, it's a pretty challenging news for Hollywood because what a film that is made in America is by definition is often not made in America. Filmmaking is a complicated process and involves lots of different countries and individuals from around the world, and they are shot around the world. So I think this is an instance where, the New York Times is reporting that many thousands of jobs in Hollywood have gone in the last few years. But with that said, I think something as significant as 100% tariff on all films made from outside of the U.S. is not only something we've never seen before, but it's also something that I don't necessarily understand how you can implement it. It was not clearly defined as to how you put a tariff on a film. Let's not forget that ultimately the trade tariffs that Donald Trump has put on basically every country in the world at this point, or almost every country, are about goods. Merchandise. It is not about services. Films, just like tourism, just like foreign students, those are services. And it's a lot harder to put taxes on those in the way that Donald Trump wants to. And I think, especially, putting a tax on an online movie, that is something that is completely outside the area of what he has been focused on the most, which is goods, especially manufactured goods. Movies, something completely different.
Yes, and now speaking of Hollywood, Jared, there are shades of the movie The Rock, the late and great Sir Sean Connery. Now, Donald Trump wants to reopen Alcatraz to house what he calls ruthless and violent offenders. Is that likely to happen, and how might that be viewed by Americans in the context of getting tough on crime?
I think there are a few things that made Donald Trump an attractive candidate to Americans, including his getting tough on immigration and fighting inflation, but also maybe not the first or second issue is crime. And so he, I think, is playing into that. Now, is it likely that he can open a prison that has been closed for over half a century, that already generates some $60 million in annual revenue from the 1.6 million tourists who visit there every year? I think that's unlikely. But ultimately, he wants to be seen as getting tough on crime. And I think him wanting to, or saying that he wants to open Alcatraz is one more opportunity for him to show his ability to, or a willingness to get tough on crime in a way that his predecessors, he deemed, didn't.
Okay, Jared Monshine, always good to get your thoughts and analysis on our program. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.